If I am not getting reimbursed as much as I used to, and I still have to pay everything, I tell patients who loses is the patient. They have less time to spend with you. So what do? They look at your blood work, and if your blood levels are high or they're low, they say, okay, Sandy, let's give you this pill, or let's give you this. And if they're normal, then we say, okay, everything's okay. And you say, well, wait a minute, I don't feel good. I'm tired, I can't lose weight, I'm cold, I have pains, I have brain fog, I can't sleep, I just don't feel good. Well, maybe we can give you an antidepressant. I mean, that's what they do, right? Or maybe we can give you some painkillers because you're in pain. So they start to treat the symptoms, and they don't really get to the cause. And my son, he just broke his finger the other day, and I took him to the hospital, and they had to reset it and medicine does a great job. I wouldn't want to send him anywhere when someone has an acute problem. But when we have chronic problems, we have immune problems, everything we just talked to you about. We've inherited genetics that express themselves because our mitochondria are sick, or we have fibromyalgia, or we have sugar dysregulation. When we have those things, there's more than one thing going wrong in the body, and medicine's not going to fix that. You got to get to the root cause of the problem and address 1, 2, or 3 of those causes. And the same thing goes for weight loss. So I tell patients, it's not your fault that you haven't been able to lose weight. It's the fault of the metabolic system that's going wrong, and no one's really crossed out the T's and dotted the I's to figure out what it is. And it's sad because medicine does a great job for an acute care, but it doesn't do a good job for chronic care. And I also say the other reason why is not only do they not have enough time for you, but they also are pharmaceutically driven, right? And I always lead a workshop, and I say, okay, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to think of 3 things that you can do today that would be more healthy, and close your eyes, and people close their eyes, and then they answer, and they say, okay, I can start to exercise, I can maybe prepare my meals, and maybe I will, meditate or something. And I say, okay, great. Someone will tell me, how many of you said I can take more medication? No one, right? So you just can't medicate yourself to good health. That's the bottom line. And it's a sad state of affairs too, because now insurance doesn't pay for a lot of stuff. It doesn't pay for a lot of the testing that we do. Like we talked about saliva sample testing, food sensitivity testing, and that's sad. It doesn't do that. So I tell patients, if you want to have treatment for a chronic condition that you have and you don't want to just be medicated, you have to look outside the box now. That's the bottom line. And it stinks. I always say, don't shoot the messenger because, I'm just the messenger. But I say it's kind of like your car insurance. If you have a car accident, the insurance will pay for that. But if your transmission is not working, or you haven't changed the oil for a long time, or it needs gas, or whatever it is that it's falling apart, it's not going to pay for that. It's going to pay for the acute-based care. So some of the stuff we do in the office is covered, but the majority of the stuff we do when we do testing and we get supplements and so forth, it's not covered. And I tell patients, you know what, you shouldn't care. I mean, I hate to, this is my getting some of the housekeeping out of the way, but we pay for a lot of things that are not as important. I have an electrician, he does very well, and if your lights don't turn on in your house, you're not going to say, oh, does my insurance cover that? You're going to get it fixed. You may call the other electrician and ask, how much are you? But you're going to get that fixed. And it's the same thing with your septic tank. If your septic tank's broken and you have poo on the floor and you need to get that poo out of there, you're going to call a plumber. And your insurance is not going to pay for it. But the moment that you have something wrong with your body, you may not pay for it because you expect insurance to pay for it. And it will if it's an acute-based problem. But if it's a chronic problem, it's a broken system. So I always try to get that out of the way first. So a little bit more about myself. So I am eligible to be what's called a chiropractic nutritionist. It required me to have over 300 hours for that. And I also do a lot of neurological treatments. You mentioned that you may have also brain fog. So most people have brain fog as well when they have uncontrolled inflammation. They don't focus as well. They don't feel as happy. They may not have good balance. Their vestibular system is off. They can't concentrate. They're not happy. They're sad. A lot of these things are causing from inflammation in your body. So I'll tell patients, not only are you coming here with an inability to lose weight, but you're coming here with joint pain, brain fog, headaches, gastrointestinal disturbances, balance and coordination issues, focusing, you can't sleep. A lot of those things are going wrong, right? They are. All right, So I'll tell patients something is wrong. Why is it in the US is ranked 50th in the world in life expectancy and is the most obese nation in the world when we spend more on healthcare per person than any other nation? Something's wrong with that, right? I mean, and so something's wrong. And it starts with the standard American diet. I mean, we had a little bit of opportunity to talk before we started, and some of the things are fundamental. Like if we have inflammation in the body, and we have fibromyalgia, and we have hormones that are imbalanced, at the end of the day, if you're on the go and you're missing meals, and you're eating out of a fast food restaurant every day, and you're eating, hi there, how are you? Oh, that's okay. Thanks for joining us.
So much crazy traffic.
Is there? Yeah, all right.
An hour to get here.
Oh, that's a bummer. Okay, well, take a deep breath in, and thank you for coming. All right, so we're just started, and I have everything on the PowerPoint presentation. So that is yours to review. I'm also recording this. I do a lot of workshops in my office. So I do thyroid workshops and fibromyalgia workshops and chronic fatigue workshops and peripheral neuropathy workshops. And they're all on my website. So if you ever want to watch a workshop that I've done, they're on there. So I'll just wait a couple more minutes because it sounds like we have a couple more people coming in.
Maybe we should wait 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock? I got to pick my daughter up from soccer practice.
It's only, what, 4 minutes?
Is it okay? All right. Well, so where was I here? So we were just talking about it all starts with some of the basics, and so I was also mentioning that I do workshops for focus and concentration issues. So ADD and autism, and I had a mom bringing her child to the workshop. Hi there. Come on in.
No, that's okay. It's right here. And I have a cousin coming.
Okay. Perfect.
Sorry, there was a big traffic accident on 441.
Oh, was there? Okay. You know.
Ambulances gonna disappear.
All right. Well, that's okay. I did have about 10, 12 people that said they were coming. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
my friend, my cousin,
Yeah.
she'll be here in a second.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry.
That's okay. So let's see where we are back here. I just started. So I just introduced myself and saying that there's a problem with our healthcare system. And when we're talking about a workshop about being healthy and losing weight, I tell patients that come to this particular workshop, it's not for your lack of trying. It's not for your lack of maybe exercise or trying to eat the right foods, but there's things that are going wrong in your body that no one really is addressing. And we spend so much money in the healthcare in the United States, yet we're ranked 50th in the world. So we have a broken model. We have what's called a pharmaceutically driven model. And I was just mentioning my son, he broke his finger and he went to the hospital and they did a great job. They set the bone and they gave him antibiotics. And I don't think you'd want to go anywhere else in the world if you had an acute problem. If you had a heart attack or stroke or a broken bone or whatever it may be, infection, you want to be here. But when you have a chronic-based problem, when you have an immune-based problem, when you have hormonal-based problem, when you have a disease that they don't really know much about, like fibromyalgia, and you're like the difficult patient, and they just want to kind of get you out of the office, then you don't want to go through the medical model because you can't really medicate yourself to good health. So that's kind of what we finished talking about. And so the bottom line is that the standard American diet is we wait way too long between meals. A lot of times I'll have patients that come in and they're seeing me at 1 o'clock and they haven't eaten anything all day. I mean, it sounds like you're not getting a lot of calories, and you're not, but you're also slowing down your metabolism, right? And not only that, you're imbalancing or creating a dysregulation of your blood sugar levels. So missing meals, waiting too long between meals, these are sometimes the basics. And this is not what this workshop is about. But we need to address some of the basics too. Like we were talking about not having the energy to prepare a nice meal and eating on the go all the time. It's going to be really hard to fix the thyroid or balance the hormones when we're still putting garbage in. And I just will make that message again where I do workshops for ADD kids and focus and concentration. And I had a mom come in and she had like this super big gulp and the 8-year-old was drinking it. And I'm like, I don't even need to talk about this workshop today. We just need to start with that. That's well, no matter how much we know about science, you need to at least address the basics. So these are the basics. Waiting too long, eating too many refined carbs. A lot of people are vegetarians, but they're actually carbitarians. So they're eating so much carbohydrates. They're not getting enough protein to make their cells work effectively. And our cells need protein to make hormones, to make neurotransmitters, to make immune cells. They need protein. So you can be a vegetarian, but you got to make sure that you're getting a balance, of your vegetables and your fruits and your proteins. Also, too many processed foods. I actually should put on here GMO foods. I just read a research study that says we eat our weight as Americans of GMO foods a year. Per year. GMO foods. So what's the problem with that? The problem with that is that they're sprayed with Roundup and they're sprayed with glyphosate. And glyphosate can't be digested in our body. And so next thing you know, that starts breaking our cells. It breaks our cells. And I was mentioning to Sandy, I was saying, I used to tell patients that you have a problem with, you can, come on in. Hi there. Come on, sit down. You could bring, and if I need more seats, then you can bring that purple chair back if you want and sit together, or however you want to do it. All right. Perfect. Alrighty. So the problem with processed foods is that mostly of them are GMO-based foods. And when they're GMO-based foods, they're sprayed with pesticide sprays. And that's going to dysregulate your immune system. And when we have a dysregulated, what's that?
How can you avoid them?
You know what? That's the magic question. You can't avoid the environmental toxins that we have in our system. But one of my main themes is little hinges swing big doors. So that's going to be for her cousin that's coming. So
And here she is.
here, okay.
Just in time.
And then I don't know if we have any more. I'm sorry for this.
No. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Good. All right. So,
I'm gonna put my name tag.
oh, that's okay.
We'll get
All right, so I'll try to organize here because we're only about 3 slides in, and I know there's a lot of traffic. So what we're talking about is about a metabolic approach to weight loss. So when we are at a weight loss workshop that we're here to get information, I tell most of my patients that I don't think there's a problem with your discipline. I don't think there's a problem with the fact that you're not trying to eat healthy or that you haven't tried exercise. Maybe there is a problem with that, but the majority of the patients, they're frustrated. They're doing those things and they're not losing their weight. And the reason is because metabolically they're not healthy. And I'll explain what metabolic means in a couple moments. But there's a lot of things going wrong, meaning your cells aren't working well. They're inflamed. They're not getting proper absorption of the nutrients. They're not getting inside the cells. There may be imbalancing of hormones. There may be toxic exposures. There may be a lot of infections. There may be heavy metal exposures. I mean, I don't even want to get into the environment, but I do workshops on the environment. And older people put their pills in the water, in the toilet, and they flush that down. And what do you think happens? It gets back into the environment somehow. And we have pesticides everywhere on GMOs. And I think it's 90 to 95% of corn is GMO'd now, and corn is in everything. So you raise a really good question. How do we avoid it? You don't. But little hinges swing big doors. So, I mean, in GMOs, it's not important. It is important. You should try to avoid GMO foods. Chickens that aren't organic, they put antibiotics in those chickens so that they can live and they'll produce. And they give them hormones so that they'll be bigger than they really should. And guess what's in the antibiotics? Arsenic is in that antibiotic. So it almost is scary to know all the information you know, but just realize that you're toxic. And you're not on purpose to varying degrees, but when you're toxic and you're not able to reduce the toxic burden in your body, then your metabolism's not working well and you're not able to lose weight. But there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of things that you can do to help that. Okay, so these are the basics again. Too much processed fast foods. I mean, we are all guilty of it, but we have to make the time of preparing meals. I mean, these are some of the basics. Not enough fruit and vegetables. very, very important. A lot of us are malnourished, and even if we're overweight. And our BMI is too high. That's the new way that they measure your body weight. It's not so much your percentage of fat, but your BMI. And there's a ratio that they do for that. But when your BMI is too high, how is it that you have nutrient deficiencies? It's because a lot of the foods you eat aren't quality nutrients. And the soils have been leached of their minerals, and so the foods that we eat don't have as much minerals as they used to have. And those minerals are necessary for your cells to work. So from a biochemical point of view, your cells need minerals, cofactors. So I'll see patients that are looking to lose weight or have metabolic issues, and they have low bone density. Their bone density is diminished. And why is their bone density diminished? Because you're leaching the minerals out of your bones to try to help these cellular activities happen in your body. So what I tell patients is, and I was telling Sandy, is I used to tell you that you're all autoimmune until proven otherwise. If you're in my office, because I see, again, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, ADD, focus issues, neurological disorders, Alzheimer's, gastrointestinal issues. When you have those issues, you're autoimmune until proven otherwise. But now what I tell them is you have mitochondrial dysfunction. Not even until proven otherwise. You have mitochondrial dysfunction. At the cellular level, you're not making energy effectively. And inside the cell is what we call reactive oxidation species, which is like the free radicals. And we need antioxidants to fight those off. But at the end of the day, your cells are not working well. And I just did a consult with a couple patients that we did a 6-week detox with them. We avoided some foods, they dropped some weight, but their A1C was still elevated. And it wasn't because, an A1C is your average of your glucose for the last 3 months. And so it should be below 5.6. I think it's above 6.1 that's considered diabetic, and they were 5.8. And they were skinny. And how is that? The sure sign of mitochondrial dysfunction is her A1C was elevated. So mitochondria, I mean, we need to get our mitochondria working better. And there's a lot of things you can do. Actually, exercise is good for that. But there's a lot of good nutrients that you can do that will help your mitochondrial function. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Pardon me. We wait to eat, we wait until we are hungry to eat, and we also wait till we are full to stop eating. And that's not always the best thing because we don't have a good connection between our satiation points in our brain and our stomach. So I always use the analogy, imagine you're eating your food and you're a quarter of the way full or done or maybe a half the way finished, and your cousin calls you that you haven't talked to in a long time, and you start talking, and then the next thing you know, excuse me for 1 second. You get caught up in the conversation, half hour goes by or 45 minutes go by, you go back to your plate and you're not hungry anymore, right? So that sometimes happens as well. And that talks about, have you ever heard of leptin? Has anyone ever heard of leptin resistance? That's a big thing that they're finding now with research. And leptin is a signaler to our brain that we're feeling full. And when we have inflammation, leptin doesn't work very well. So we're not told we're full when we eat past that point of being full. And that has to do with mitochondrial dysfunction. So I'd say if you get nothing out of this workshop today and you just say, my mitochondria are not working well, then you've got half the lesson. Not eating enough protein. Our cells need a lot, and sometimes we eat too much protein. But not eating enough protein is a big problem because that protein is the framework for hormones. Protein is the framework for detoxification. Protein is the framework for carrying nutrients into cells, and so that's a huge problem. And then also eating for psychological reasons. And so those are big basic points. Our healthcare model is based on a reactive model. We wait for something to go wrong, and then we treat the symptoms with medication. One of the things that I said at the very beginning was because I've been practicing since 2001, and now it's 2016, I say that Medicare pays me less today than they did in 2001. But rent and everything else has gone up. So what I said was doctors typically have less time to spend with you because they need to see more people for the same amount of income. And so when that happens, then you tell them, I don't feel good, I have no energy, and they say, well, your blood tests show that you're fine. or your glucose a little bit high, but I'm not really worried about it right now, or your cholesterol is high, let's get you on a cholesterol lowering medication, but that doesn't fix the things that are going broken in your body. And so the thing that I mentioned is it's a pharmaceutically driven model, and really you can't medicate yourself to good health based on just taking these pills and that pills when you have a lot of different things that are going wrong in the body. So the truth is that we are an integrative organism. One system affects another. So if we're not eating optimal amount of protein, if we are not getting an optimal amount of leafy green vegetables and nutrients, and then we're not able to digest that and absorb that and bring it to the cells, then that's going to impact your hormone production. It's going to impact your thyroid. It's going to impact your delivery of oxygen. It's going to impact everything. And it starts with a domino, and it impacts all the other dominoes. All right. So why is there too much fat on your body? Is it because you just have a bad diet? I don't think so. I think it may have started with that, and you may have certain foods that you shouldn't necessarily be eating, but that's not the main problem. Is it just because you don't exercise enough? And again, I don't think that's the problem. It can certainly contribute to it, but I don't think that's the huge problem. Is it from bad genes? No matter what you do, you can't lose weight because you have bad genes. Again, we're learning more and more that that is part of the component, but that's not the big problem. Multiple studies prove that it's not, you're just not destined to be overweight because of your bad genes. What's the reason then? It's because you're not healthy metabolically. And hopefully we've been showing that up until now. So what is, it's basically, it's a vicious downward spiral. So we're metabolically sick, we gain weight, and then it causes us to be even more metabolically sick. And that's the downward spiral. So what I tell patients, this is a slide I use for all of my workshops, is that if you're coming to this presentation today, you're not just coming because you have a problem with losing weight. You're coming because you have a common threads, a lot of things that are going wrong with your body. So on this side of the equation, we can have thyroid problems, or we have type 2 diabetes, or maybe it's not quite type 2 yet, it's insulin resistance, or you have numbness, tingling, peripheral neuropathy in your hands or in your feet, or you have vertigo or balance disorders, or you can't sleep, or we have fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue, chronic neck pain, IBS, digestive disorders, neurological disorders, dementia, migraine headaches. Anyone of us here have some of those things as well? We should have, we probably do, right? So what I tell patients is we have two things going wrong. And there's metabolic problems and there's neurological problems. So let's explain that. Metabolic means, we're going to explain that in a second, but some examples of metabolic problems is we have anemias. And again, they don't have to be full-blown anemia. So what do I mean by that? So let me ask you, how do you think they come up with the lab ranges for the testing that you take in the lab? They come up with the lab ranges based on the average of everyone who took the lab the year before. So if our population is getting sicker and sicker and sicker, then you're being compared to a sicker and sicker population base. So here's a real good example, which I would want to just pull my hair out. But I had a patient come in and she had her glucose levels, and it showed that her glucose levels were normal, but the lab ranges said 65 to 136 was the lab range. Does anyone know what lab range you need to be diagnosed with diabetes is? It's 120. It's 126. So what does that tell you about that lab range? It tells you that if you have diabetes, it's now normal. Right? Isn't that crazy? I've never seen anything that crazy. So she was told, but hers was low anyways. Hers was low. But the bottom line is, the average of the people that took the lab at that particular lab, they were all, on the high end and the low end. The average ended up being 136. So unless you're higher than the high person or the low person, you're told you're normal. But guess what? You can feel crappy before you're past that line. You could be at 123 and you still feel crappy. You could be even at 110 and you still feel crappy. So what I tell patients is there's a functional range. There's a healthy range that the Endocrine Society developed, and I think that's what they base their insurance, their rating of health on. And so what I'm saying when I talk about this is every single lab range has a high and a low. So anemia. I've seen people that they're not quite low enough to be diagnosed as anemia, but they're trending towards anemia, and they are exhausted and they're tired. But I couldn't send in a diagnosis on the CPT code for insurance to pay for it and define it as anemia because it wasn't in the lab ranges. Does that make sense? And so they were mad at me. I told one of the patients, well, you're trending towards anemia. You have anemic tendencies. And I don't say you're anemic because by definition, you have to be lower than those lab ranges. And she came back, well, my doctor never told me this before. And I said, well, because they don't look at it this way. And they have lab ranges for that, every single ranges. So that's one of the very first starting points that I do when I work with a chronic patient is bring me in your blood work and I'll put it on a functional scale and we'll see some of the things that you don't even know that you are dealing with that they've never told you about because they don't look at it that way. And again, I'm a little bit of a pessimist, but why don't they do that? Well, it's easier that way. You know, I'm busy. I don't get paid as much as I used to. I got to see more people. Unless you're high or low and I don't have to give you medications, then you're fine. It's kind of sad, right? I mean, that's the way it works. And then what do? We give antidepressants and all these different things. So unstable blood sugar, adrenal gland dysfunction. All of you here have an adrenal gland dysfunction. No one's told you about that. And if you ask the medical model, what do you think about adrenal fatigue? They'll tell you there's no such thing as it. And maybe the definition, there's a whole definition for adrenal fatigue, and the medical model sees it at one way, and unless you fit that model, remember we talked about black and white, then you're told that nothing's wrong with you. But you can have adrenal insufficiency, which means you just don't have a lot of cortisol to get you through the day. So you may do well in the morning and then little Johnny was in trouble at school and then you're exhausted for the rest of the day. Or a boss yells at you and you're just floored for the rest of the day. Those are signs of adrenal gland dysfunction. I suffered with adrenal gland dysfunction. And I had a patient, he was an acupuncturist, and he brought this book into me and it changed my life. Has anyone seen this book before? No, it's called, Why Do I Still Have Thyroid Symptoms When My Lab Tests Are Normal? So I thought, why is he giving me this book? I don't need this book. And so I joke around. I took it, thank you very much, and I left it on my bookshelf at home. And every day I walked by it, it was kind of like pulling me towards it, like, come read me, come read me. And so finally I picked it up and I started reading it. And I was like, oh my goodness, that is exactly me. And there's a chapter on here on adrenal fatigue. So I have now 13-year-old twins, but at the time they were newborns. And I had just moved from California to Florida. And I had over $150,000 worth of student debt, and I injured my back. So I was exhausted. I was tired. I was stressed, and I was crashing in the middle of the day. Couldn't remember where I put my car keys. Just all of these classic symptoms of adrenal dysfunction, and so that's what made me learn what I'm doing now and dedicate my life to trying to help people that have chronic problems. And so everyone that has a chronic problem has an adrenal gland, what we'll call it insufficiency. So you just don't have enough cortisol to get you through the day. And that's what adrenal glands do. They support inflammation. So cortisol, or if we have inflammation, if we have a pain, we take NSAIDs. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, and those are cortisol. And so we take cortisone if we have inflammation to help us. But our own body can do that on its own. So that's what adrenal glands do. They settle inflammation, but they also stabilize blood sugar. So if we wait a long time throughout the day to eat, or we have too much of a spiking of our blood sugar, you're going to ask the adrenal glands to work as well. The other thing that adrenal glands do is if we have infections, if we have all those environmental things that I told you about, if we have all those things going on, the adrenal glands have to settle the inflammation. And the other thing adrenal glands have to do, if I'm held up at gunpoint and God forbid that happens, I start to hyperventilate and I have that instantaneous adrenaline rush, adrenals have to shift gears and bring me back to normal again. And the adrenals release adrenaline too. So if we have spouses and stress at home or bosses or finances, we're all stressed out. And then what else do? We eat so much stimulants and sugars and caffeine, and you go to Starbucks and you see all these people that are on these energy lotions and totions and whatever they are. We're all burnt out adrenally. So if you're here today and no one's ever told you about an adrenal gland problem, I tell you that you've been mismanaged. No one's ever told you about that. Yep.
It will lead you to overreact.
It's a great point. It's a great point. So if you don't have a nice adrenal response, it's kind of like the clutch on a car that doesn't shift properly. So you're going to have a bad, bumpy ride. And so if you have a stressful event, you can have a nervous breakdown, you can have anxiety, you can have heart palpitations, you can just crash and cry. You're just not going to have an appropriate response to stress. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to everyone? I mean, we're
at the root of that, though, because there's too much cortisol being released?
a great question. So initially, there's too much.
Okay.
And then over time, supply cannot keep up with demand. So one of the saliva tests that we do, we'll do a cortisol response throughout the day. So we spit into a tube, you do it in the morning, you do it at the afternoon, you do it in the middle of the afternoon, and you do it at nighttime. And you can see your response throughout the day. And you can determine, is it a stage 1 where it's too much, or is it a stage 7 or it's nothing at all, or is it somewhere in between? And so Sandy was telling me she did a saliva sample or a blood test. Most doctors will do a blood test and they'll do it first thing in the morning. And the ranges are so broad. Remember we talked about those so broad ranges, 6 to 21 a lot of the times for cortisol. So if you're at 7, you're told you're normal, but really, how is 7 the same as 19? It's not. The other thing is, what do you like at 2 o'clock in the afternoon once all of your energy is gone? You have nothing left. So my little soapbox is the reason why I feel that that the pharmaceutical model doesn't accept, or medical model doesn't accept adrenal fatigue as an actual diagnosis, is there's no patented medication to fix it. It's kind of scary, right? Yeah, but you know, so I tell patients it's adrenal insufficiency. And when I work with patients, they say, well, I went to see my endocrinologist and they didn't believe that it's an actual problem. It's not even real. And the way that they define adrenal fatigue is they do an ACTH test. So ACTH is released in the brain, and it's a hormone that makes your adrenals work. And so if I get stressed, my brain releases ACTH, and it goes in the bloodstream to the adrenals, and the adrenals mount a response by secreting cortisol. So what they do is they give you artificial ACTH, and if your adrenals mount a response in any way, shape, or form, you don't have adrenal fatigue. That's it, that's all. Well, what is it? What if I'm stressed and I'm anxious and I crash in the middle of the day and I don't sleep and I wake up and blah, blah, blah? Nope, you don't have adrenal fatigue. It's either black or white. So it kind of sucks, but it is what it is. So how did I get there? All right, so we all have, most people have hormonal imbalances, hidden infections, food sensitivities. That's a big one. When we have food reactivities to dairy or gluten or soy, then every time we eat it, we're creating inflammation to that food. And what does that impact? The adrenals. But it also impacts the mitochondria, the cellular level. Food sensitivities, chronic infections, hormonal imbalances, and neurological imbalances. So let me define metabolism. Easiest way to define metabolism is you eat food and it gets converted to energy. That's the easiest way to define what metabolism is. So if we have metabolic problems, we're obviously not making energy properly. That's the bottom line. And all of these things like anemias, thyroid dysfunction, unstable blood sugar, hormonal imbalance, autoimmune attacks, food sensitivities, chronic inflammation, all of those are going to impact your ability to make energy. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so you can go to the gym all you want and you can try to cut your calories all you want, but all of those things aren't addressing all of these things here. And if I were to asterisk some of the most important ones, it's usually chronic inflammation and hidden infections. And I would put beside chronic inflammation environmental toxins.
And what do you do, Jay? Because that's my biggest problem. I don't know if you know osteopenia.
Yeah.
What do they call the other one? Osteoporosis.
Yeah.
When I get up in the morning,
Yeah.
all my fingers hard.
Yeah, so you got to stay till the end to hear the solutions. All right. Well, the first thing is you need to identify what the problems are, right? I mean, you got to be a detective, and you got to look for clues and fingerprints and clues at the evidence at the scene. And that's what we're doing, is we're looking for clues. We're trying to figure out what's going on in your body. So this is the relationship, though. Okay, so if metabolically means whenever we eat food, it gets converted to energy, where do you think 30% of the energy system goes to in our body? Our endocrine system, our digestive system, our nervous system, our immune system, or our cardiovascular system? The answer is it's our nervous system. So our nervous system, our brain. So that's why when you have patients that have metabolic issues, they also have brain-based issues. They don't focus. They're not happy. They're sad, or they're anxious, or they're irritable, or they're stressed. I mean, that has a lot to do with our adrenals, but has a lot to do with the fact that we're not getting enough fuel to the brain, and then the brain fatigues. And then we stand up and we get lightheaded. We don't have as good balance. We're in a car and we have a little bit of dizziness. We have numbness and tingling in our feet. Our posture kind of goes. We don't digest our food as much. All of those things need good brain function. All of those things. So it could impact poor hormone balance, because that's where hormones are being released in the brain too. Our brain tells our hormones, our glands, to work. It could impact depression, our mood state, no motivation, memory, brain fog, focus. How many of us have problems focusing? I mean, we can be watching a show and then someone's talking in the background and you just can't drown those two informations out. It's just that brain is not focusing. It's hyper vigilant. It's going all the time. So consequences of obesity, type 2 diabetes, fatigue, chronic inflammation, musculoskeletal problems, cardiovascular problems, and last but not least, poor self-image. I mean, when we're not losing weight, we don't feel good, obviously. So 4 essentials to fat loss: proper metabolism, proper nutrition, proper exercise, and proper mindset. So you were asking a little bit about what do you do about it. Well, we'll talk about it. All 4 must be in place in order for fat loss. Now, on my workshop presentation, I talked about the HA2CG protocol. And when I was putting my presentation together, there was probably over 120 slides. And I thought, okay, I can't talk about all of this stuff. So the HA2CG protocol is in the back of those copies. But the thing is that we need to fix some of the hallmark problems first. So I do a couple different ways for us to try to stimulate fat loss. HA2CG is one of the ways that we do it, and then reducing exposures to certain foods, like going on a paleo type of protocol where we're avoiding gluten, dairy, soy, egg, stuff like that for about 5 to 6 weeks. And we go through a detox where we clean up the immune system and we clean up the gut, and then we detoxify the liver. So there's different ways that we do that, but I hope you guys don't mind that I wanted to talk a little bit more about this and get this going. All right. So the top metabolic disturbances that cause obesity: poor gut function. That's one of the main ones that we see. And what are reasons for poor gut function? Infections, food intolerances, and dysbiosis. Does anyone know what dysbiosis is? It means too much unhealthy bacteria. How many of us have ever been on antibiotics before? Yeah, how many of us have been on antibiotics more than 5 times in their life? Not you? No? How about more than 10 times? My hand's still up. No? Not more than 10 times? More than 15 times in your life? My life, my hand's still up. I can't be beating all of you guys. How about more than 20 times? Yeah, I mean, we've been on antibiotics a lot, right? I mean, my mother is a public health nurse. So they would go into the school systems and immunize the kids. And anytime, my sister's a family practice doctor, and anytime her kids get sick, what do? They run for the medicine cabinet and get antibiotics. And the goal of the antibiotics is what? To blow up all the bad stuff. But what does it also do? It blows up all the good stuff too. And there's new research that shows that we need healthy bacteria in our gut to lose weight and to have a healthy terrain and to manage the immune system. And so if you've been on antibiotics once, twice, 5, 10, 20 times, you definitely have a dysbiosis problem, which means a bad ratio of bad bacteria to good bacteria. So if you're doing a weight loss program and no one's focusing on gut health and no one's focusing on re-inoculating healthy bacteria and rebuilding gut lining and trying to fight off infections, then you're not doing a proper program.
Can that be tested for?
There's different ways that you can test. Yeah, you can do a stool sample. And again, so how many of you think that getting saliva samples and doing food sensitivities and doing stool samples, how many of you think that that's covered with insurance? No. Okay, so again, why do you think it's not covered? What would you say if you were to, everything that we've talked about? Well, I would say the main reason is because it's a pharmaceutically driven model. And we give you a pill for this or pill for that, and we don't really care about that. We'll just give you antibiotics, right? Or I would also say that the lab ranges are so broad that you actually didn't show up positive or negative or too high or too low, and so there's not a medical necessity to order the test. Does that make sense too? Because I can't order a test unless there's a positive finding. So it's a double whammy.
But
Right?
if you can test for it and you find is there a way to introduce more bacteria?
Absolutely. Like, okay, so what I do is I don't order a lot of stool samples anymore, because I'll look at your I'll look at your blood work and put it on a functional scale, and we'll see inflammatory markers, and we'll say we know you're inflamed, and we know that potentially you have mitochondrial dysfunction. So let's go through a 6-week detox. Let's remove harmful foods that we know, even if we don't do a food reactivity test, that are the most common ones. And after 5 or 6 weeks, we'll reintroduce them. But in the meantime, let's reduce the inflammation. Let's give you some nutrients to put out the fire in the body. Let's give you some nutrients to re-inoculate your body with healthy bacteria. So you assume guilty and then go from there. Does that make sense? Yeah. I mean, you can test, and sometimes what I'll do is, there's a lot of tests that I'll do. I'll do food sensitivity testing. And then that way we know for good what are the foods that you're eating, and those are the foods that are off your plate for good. And sometimes it's sad. Sometimes I see a whole list of foods that this person is no longer able to eat anymore. And that's not going to be easy. But if you clean up the gut and regulate your immune system, then slowly you can start bringing those back in. You know? So it's sad. And again, does insurance pay for these things a lot of the times? No. And I tell patients, should you care? No. I mean, it's going to change your life if you get these test results back. And I don't think you guys were here, but I was saying we pay for a lot of different things that doesn't involve our health. We pay for electrical work in our house to get done. We pay for plumbing to get done, our car to get fixed. But the moment I tell you, sorry, it's not going to test your adrenals, it's not going to pay for it, then we don't do it for ourselves, unfortunately. And we feel that insurance should pay for it. I feel insurance should pay for it, but insurance is a pharmaceutically driven model, and it's an acute care-based model. It's not good when it comes time to chronic conditions. It's an algorithm of care. Endocrinologists don't even believe in adrenal fatigue. They don't. They don't look at environmental toxins and glyphosates because it's not going to be part of their protocol to fix that. There's a lot of things you can do naturally to fix that. You can detox naturally. I have them in my office. They're called infrared saunas. You ever heard of saunas? So we sit in the saunas, and that helps remove toxins from our body. So saunas doesn't have to be infrared. You can go in a sauna and just sweat out toxin. It's not infrared, and you're leaching out toxicity from your body. That's healthy too. But infrared is a deeper penetration of wavelength, and it will get penetrating deeper into your tissues and remove those things. So there's a lot of things you can do for that. We do homeopathic preparations. I'll get into that a little bit, but basically homeopathic preparations are another way to help detoxify your body. The HA2CG protocol that we show at the end is homeopathic preparations that mimic the HCG diet. And so it's been shown that that will help you lose weight as well. So we have different ways that we can go about having you fix your body and drop the pounds. The HA2CG is radical. It's very intense. So it involves a 500 calorie program or a 1,000 calorie program. That's intense. My 6-week detox doesn't limit your calories that much. You can have as much calories as you want, provided it's not gluten, dairy, egg, soy, corn, rice, nuts. So one's a little bit different than the other, and we figure out what's best for you. If we have a lot of rampant inflammation in the body, we may not want to just address those things first. So it's tailored to your body. So the top metabolic disturbances, again, unstable blood sugar, leptin resistance, we talked a little bit about that, adrenal dysfunction, thyroid dysfunction, anemia, chronic inflammation, autoimmune, and hormonal imbalances. How do you know if you have all of those things? You test, right? You look at your blood tests and try to get more tests if you don't have those. Poor gut function, the father of medicine, Hippocrates says, look to the gut and there you'll find the origin of all human illness. And that's so true now, right? I mean, that's what you put into your body is what affects you. Poor gut function, food intolerances, gut infections, leaky gut, dysbiosis, all of those will cause inflammation. Also, gut inflammation can impact the adrenal glands. We talked about that, right? Because if we have inflammation in our gut, our adrenal glands are the main inflammatory hormone, and they have to settle that down. When we have too much cortisol circulating, we have fat deposition. How do you know if you have these things? I talked to you about that. You have to do proper testing. So these are some of the testing we do. LabCorp, Metamatrix, Cyrex, and diagnostics. Those are hormone samples, and we're also doing one more that I'm putting on there is genetic testing, methylation testing. That's a big one. That tests how sick your mitochondria are. Functional medicine. So what we try to do is we try to remove the problem first, as much as we can. Remove the reactivities to the foods, restore the gut lining with flora and digestive enzymes, and repair leaky gut. Let me ask you guys, how many of you take antacids, like for high acid? Okay, so I would say that that's the biggest marketing myth in the world. The biggest, because what happens is, as we get older, we lose the ability to disinfect our food. So we don't secrete as much stomach acid, it doesn't break it down, just because we're getting older. And we really are not engineered to eat processed, cooked, crappy foods, right? So over time, by the time we get to 30, 35, we don't secrete enough stomach acid to break that food down. So what happens? It sits there and it ferments. And think of a snake that is eating a mouse, and you see sort of that lump in the stomach. It's just sitting there, and it's not going anywhere. And it creates a reflux of backlog, and that's where we get that heartburn. And what do we think? Too much stomach acid. So what do? We get stomach acid reducing stuff to make even our low stomach acid even worse. Now that's not to say...
But if you have acid reflux normally, automatically...
How do you know you have acid reflux?
Because when they see the GI test and they saw it.
Okay, but they didn't see it. They just saw some of maybe they saw erosive destruction of the lining and had an ulcer, and they assumed that was too much stomach acid. There's a lot of blood markers that you can look on your test to show that you're not absorbing your protein, and by doing that, you're not secreting enough stomach acid. So there are instances where someone has too much stomach acid, but I would probably say 95% of the time, it's too little stomach acid. And you're not secreting enough stomach acid to break your food down. So then what happens? The food sits there and it creates inflammation. It creates fire in your gut. And then what does that do? That breaks the little lining of your walls apart, and you have what's called leakiness of your gut. And think of that like if I have a fine metal strainer and I'm draining the pasta stays in the pasta thing and the water flows out. Imagine that's all broken now. And not only does the water fall out, but the pasta falls out too. And it's not digested properly. So then what happens? Your immune system goes in there and attacks it. And it attacks it by making an antibody. And now, every time you eat that food, you have what's called a food sensitivity. You react to gluten and dairy and egg and soy, almost like it's an infection. And every time you eat it, your immune system creates an infection. And then what happens? It causes swelling all over your body, and joint pain, and fibromyalgia. Starting to connect the dots a little bit, right? So the main thing that I do is called a Repair-Vite diet. So that's a protocol where we remove foods and we help cleanse the liver, and we do that for 6 weeks. And the ladies that you saw talking on the videos, they're the ones that did that protocol, and they lose weight on that protocol.
Is that introducing more good bacteria into the
Yes,
stomach?
second phase is.
Yeah, you can't increase your stomach acid production.
You can actually take stomach acid. It's called HCl.
Oh, okay.
So we sell it here.
Yeah.
It's called.
I've been taking digestive enzymes.
That's
so I
helpful.
know that I probably am reacting to certain foods, but I continue.
So the digestive enzymes will help with the carbohydrate breakdown, but not necessarily the protein breakdown.
Yeah.
So HCl is a supplement that falls off our shelves a lot.
Yeah.
So we sell that, and whenever someone eats a protein-based diet, they take HCl, and it's really helpful.
Because are you looking at like antacids or like a Band-Aid? You just think you're putting.
It's not even a Band-Aid, it's a reverse Band-Aid.
Yeah,
It creates even more problems.
Yeah.
It's really, want me to pull my hair out, that's one of the biggest ones.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Unstable blood sugars, we talked about that. And so basically in metabolism, we eat food and it gets created to energy. And when it gets created to energy, it's glucose is what it is. And diabetes, we have more diabetes than we've ever had, right? And like I said, when I looked at this patient today, and she'd been on a 6-week detox, and her A1C levels were high, and it wasn't because she was eating so much sugars and so much grains, it's because her mitochondria is sick. And when your mitochondria are sick, it's going to create insulin resistance. Does that make sense? All right, so 1 in 3 are undiagnosed. 23.6 million in 2007. What is it now? It's the number one cause of leading blindness, kidney failure. Also, there's something called NASH now, and that is, I forget what the acronym is for NASH, but it's basically fatty liver. And fatty liver not because of alcohol, but just because of unhealthy blood sugar. And we all have, most patients that are mitochondria sick have fatty liver. And that's where all this energy takes place. So people with blood sugar issues have cells that are resistant to insulin. So when we have blood sugar issues, we're going to see high cholesterol, high triglycerides, high LDLs. It's, you know how you know you have an insulin problem? You have a meal and then you crash. That's when you have an insulin-based problem. Because you're like, insulin is knocking on the door, telling the sugar to get out of the bloodstream, and the cells are locking the door and not letting it get out of it. And then you crash because it's an energetic process to use that sugar to make cholesterol.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I used to tell my doctor, 10 years ago, and I don't know why they didn't understand. I would say, a bowl of pasta will throw me into a coma.
Knock you out,
Yeah.
In 20 minutes,
Yeah.
I would be sleeping in a coma.
Yeah.
But,
Well, I think most of them know that now, don't they?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And what do they usually do to treat diabetes? They give you more insulin. That's like being married to someone and yelling at them even louder to get them to listen to you. Eventually they drown you out. And eventually insulin is not going to work anymore. Right? And that's going to create inflammation, cardiovascular problems, all of those problems. The day you get on insulin, you're not going to be the same. It ultimately fails, and it keeps going up and up and up.
And is that called insulin resistance?
Insulin resistance is even before that.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Right now they keep giving my husband higher and higher.
So other things that control your blood sugar are pancreas, adrenal glands, thyroid, liver, brain. All 5 of those things have to be working properly. So that's why that person who had adrenal gland dysfunction is going to impact their blood sugar as well. Leptin is the hormone stored in fat. The more fat you have on the body, the more leptin you have, and then you have leptin resistance. So one of the take-home lessons is if you have too much circulating hormones in your body, eventually the cells tune out to them. And so the more leptin you have, the more the cells tune out to them, and so you don't feel satiated. You don't feel like you've eaten enough. So remember, put less on the plate and then pretend your long-lost cousin calls you and eat 2/3 of it, start talking, and then 20, 30 minutes later, you're not hungry anymore. Because now leptin has a better signaling. Leptin, too much fat equals too much leptin. Your brain stops listening, and this is bad. Why? Because your brain thinks that you're hungry all the time. And that's going to impact your thyroid. So it's a domino effect, right? Mouse unable to produce leptin, resulting in obesity on the left, and on the normal mouse on the right, on this right here. Adrenal gland dysfunction, we kind of already went through all of that, right? We talked about adrenal glands. High cortisol is going to create insulin resistance as well. Disrupts your thyroid. And it doesn't allow you to sleep, and it impacts your minerals. People that have bad adrenals drink water, and 20 minutes, 2 seconds later, they're peeing. That's when we know we have an adrenal problem. Causes of thyroid dysfunction, autoimmune, high cortisol, everything we've sort of been talking about. Thyroid symptoms, fatigue, weight gain, all of these things. Thyroid basically does everything in the body. So, I mean, we have thyroid. If we're here at a workshop, someone has to address your thyroid. And we talked about that earlier. And most of the people don't get a proper thyroid test. They only get TSH, and no one's ever testing against their antibodies. So, treatment for this. So here's a good slide. Treatment for Hashimoto's is you got to remove the antigen. You got to figure out what's causing the reaction in the first place. You got to modulate the immune system. Emulsified vitamin D is very good. Glutathione is very good. Fish oils are very good. And you also have to support the side of the immune system that's out of whack. And that needs a little bit of help with a functional medicine doctor.
Okay, that's for Hashimoto's, but what if you're just hypothyroid?
Same thing. 80% of hypothyroid are Hashimoto's. 80%. 8 out of 10. So I would assume that you are until proven otherwise.
Wow.
Yep.
How do you remove estrogen? Isn't that naturally occurring?
Well, that's a great question. It's not so much removing estrogen. You want to try to help your body detoxify against estrogen. And guess what has a lot of estrogen? Soys. And guess what also has a lot of estrogens? Plastics, BPAs. You've heard of BPAs before? Those are all endocrine disruptors.
I just heard that nail polish is.
There's so many things. I mean, it's so crazy. Causes of anemia, you can read through that. Vitamin and mineral deficiencies, all of these things are causing your metabolic disturbances. And if we have anemia problems, we could have headaches and dizziness and brain fog. Hormonal imbalances could be causing all of the things that we're dealing with. Vitamin and deficiencies, fixing the gut, modulate the immune system. So the good thing about all of this is if you fix some of the benchmark things that are going on, you can fix the blood sugar and the thyroid. And all of these things have the same path. Like when I do a thyroid workshop, I'm almost talking about the same things. When I do a peripheral neuropathy workshop, I'm talking about the same things. The only difference is the lack of energy or the lack of too much inflammation has destroyed the nerves in your feet. Whereas at a weight seminar, it's impacted the thyroid, it's impacted your hormones, it's impacted your leptin level, it's impacted a lot of these things. So it's a lot of the same mechanics. Chronic inflammation is going to create brain fog, joint pain. We talked about joint pain, autoimmunities. These markers are very important. C-reactive protein, fibrinogen, and homocysteine. And a lot of the times I'll look at your labs and none of you have all those things. So we can't tell if you have those things on there.
Wait a minute, you have a high creatine protein?
Excuse me?
I just saw something there.
That's
C-reactive protein?
I think I had that.
Yeah, I'm sure you-
My
I'm
last lab.
Yeah.
When I asked the doctor, he said, don't worry about it.
That's okay, so here's the other thing that drives me crazy too. So you remember how I told you the lab ranges are so broad? And so if you're not past the range, you're told you're normal. Sometimes you're past the range, and what do they say? Don't worry about it.
That's what he said.
Yeah, I mean, how are you not? What do you mean don't worry about it? It's got to mean something, right? It's crazy. What do you mean don't worry about it? natural treatment for chronic inflammation, omega-3s and omega-6, balancing those. So one of the best ways we can balance omega-3s and omega-6s are stop eating hydrogenated oils, stop eating fast foods and processed foods and canned foods. All of those things are high in omega-6. That's why natural-based foods, green leafy vegetables, proteins, I mean, all of these things food can be your medicine, provided it's organic, it's not GMO'd, and it's taken time to prepare. I mean, it's not rocket science, you know. Gut infections, food sensitivities, all of that stuff can be balanced with a healthy diet. Our immune system mistakenly attacks so if we have an autoimmune system problem, our immune system attacks our own tissues. That's what an autoimmune problem is. All of these ones here are all examples. RA, psoriasis, scleroderma, lupus, colitis, there's many more. Way more autoimmunities than we've ever seen in the past. What's that? Lupus is typically a autoimmune against a lot of the joint tissue, in the connective tissue in the body. And then hormone imbalances as well.
Can you get blood clot from lupus?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, that could be one. I don't think that's the main reason for blood clots, but circulatory problems. You can have autoimmunity against vessels too. Yeah. So the medical approach is wait until the tissue is so bad and then squash the entire immune system with steroids. That's what they do.
In other words, the shot I was getting, that steroid shot,
Is to just kill the immune system. Let's use an atom bomb and blow everything up and make sure there's no inflammation. That's what it is. Whereas the functional medicine approach is remove the things that are triggering it. Address the problems. Modulate the immune system. Vitamin D. Those are all good nutrients. And we already talked about the lab tests. We talked about the functional ranges and the wide ranges. So again, let's summarize. The top metabolic disturbances for obesity or overweight is poor gut function. 3 things for poor gut function is infections, food intolerances, and dysbiosis. And one of the things we said that could really help with food intolerances is hydrochloric acid, digestive enzymes, repairing the gut, removing the foods that you're reacting to. So there's a lot of things you can do, right? Unstable blood sugar, leptin resistance, adrenal gland dysfunction, thyroid dysfunction, anemias, chronic inflammation, autoimmune conditions, hormonal imbalances. No wonder, no matter how much calories you restrict or how much you go to your gym, why you're still not able to lose the weight. So which one of these things are causing your problem? You gotta test to figure it out. And I just get into a little bit of brain misfiring and how we have metabolic problems that lead to neurological problems and neurological problem that leads to brain problems. And what are some of the problems with the brain? Chronic fatigue, migraine headaches, blurred vision, difficulty falling or staying asleep, heart palpitations, irritable bowel, UTIs, high blood pressure, fibro fog, all of these things. That's how you know you have brain problems. So we do a lot of brain-based activities when I work with a patient in our office. This is what I'll tell them is we help with oxygen and we'll help with activation to the brain. And that's some of the things that we do in our office as well.
What does that mean, help with oxygen?
So I have oxygen concentrators.
Oh.
So patients will do oxygen when they're here. They'll do brain exercises with the iPad. Getting out is oxygen, just getting oxygen to the brain. But also from a red blood cell point of view, helping the absorption of B vitamins, iron concerns, if there's too much bleeding in the inside. There's a lot of reason why from a cellular level we're not getting enough oxygen to the brain too. So what I do is I have an opportunity to do a sort of a trial basis with me. So I have 2 visits. And the first visit is we do a neurological exam. So we want to see how it's impacted your brain. So we do a functional neurological exam. So that means we test your balance, we test your eye movements, we test your coordination movements, we test how your feet are sensing certain things, and then we get an idea how it's impacted your brain. because that's going to give me a recommendation to what we can do to get that brain firing again. Because remember, 30% of the food that we can convert into energy needs to go into the brain. And so you may be coming here to the workshop thinking all you're dealing with is an inability to lose weight, when meanwhile you know you're not as focused anymore, you get dizziness very quickly, you can't feel your feet as well. I mean, you have a lot of neurological issues. And the example I use is if we have a sprinkler system in our grass and the water doesn't turn on, eventually the grass is going to start to die. And then we fix the water system and we turn it back on, but the patch of grass in the back that didn't get water, it died. So we need to put new sod on there. Same thing kind of for our brain. It's a muscle, it didn't get enough fuel, and we can give it more fuel, but it still needs to be stimulated. And that's what we talk about with brain-based exercises that we do in the office. That stuff more than likely is covered through insurance. More than likely that stuff is covered. So we also have you bring in your blood work, and I'll put that on a functional scale so we can determine which areas of your body was going on that no one told you about. Is there anemias? Is there thyroid dysfunction? Most of the time we see there's not enough testing, so I'm going to make some recommendations. You fill out my 20 pages or so of paperwork so I get to talk about your environmental history. How many of us have silver fillings? I never even talked about that. Silver fillings is a huge one. Mercuries, that's a big one. So not to say you have to get them out of there, but that's one of the things that's dysregulating your immune system. And we can start to try to leach those out of there by doing healthy stuff. Not too aggressive. I don't chelate, but there's other things you can do. And then you fill out my paperwork that if you haven't had blood work for a while, you fill out the questionnaire and it tells you about certain areas that is related to your gallbladder function or related to your liver function or related to your adrenal function. So I get an idea, because we don't have blood work, okay, based on these 1s, 2s, and 3s that you circled should be all 0s and you got 2s and 3s, that gallbladder health is not working very good. Based on the neurological exam that you fixed out, or examination that you filled out, 2s and 3s on this one, your temporal lobe is not working so good. So there's a lot of information we can yield, even if we don't start. I tell you, hey, this is what's going on with you. I typically like a spouse there because when I do a neurological exam on someone and I have them close their eyes and they can't stand up still and they're falling over, their spouse realizes it's more than a problem than losing weight. There's some brain-based issues. So that's helpful. It doesn't have to be, but I always recommend that. On visit 2, what I do is I go over exactly everything I found on the functional exam, on the blood work. We put it on a scale. You were told nothing was wrong, but I have here low-grade anemia. We have some adrenal gland dysfunction. We have some signs of inflammation and mitochondrial dysfunction. You're missing everything and there's nothing on here. I mean, we can tell all the stuff that is going on there. I go over the results of your neurological exam and say, hey, your left side of the brain is not working as good as your right side of the brain, specifically the back or the front, and here's the things that you can do to fix those things. I go over what different programs that I have, what different tests that I would recommend. The typical tests that I recommend are food reactivity testing, and I don't test gluten because I think most of you guys should be off of that anyways, so I test the foods that are similar to gluten: dairy, egg, corn, rice, soy, potato, quinoa, hemp, oats, millet, all of the things that you see in gluten-free section that you're eating because you're trying to be healthy, but is still causing the same reactivity. Big problem. I do saliva sample testing. We typically do genetic testing, and now we're doing a lot of the detoxing with the 6-week detox. So I'll make a recommendation for that.
How much those tests gonna cost?
Well, we'll get into that right now. How's that? I don't know because everyone's different, but I'll give you an idea right now, okay? But guess what? Insurance is not going to pay for it.
I know that.
All right.
My bladder function.
All right. So what I do is I have an offer. I see a lot of different patients. Like I said, peripheral neuropathy, fibromyalgia, thyroid patients, weight loss. So I usually accept 5 new weight loss patients per month. Usually the first 2 visits are $149. That's not each, that's for both of them. So even that's a good deal. But because you've come to the workshop tonight, if you pre-book your schedule for tonight and reserve your spot, it's $75. So you save half price. But if you leave today and say, oh, I want to come back, it's $149. And the reason I do that is because you've come through and you've sat through what I do. I usually make people either come to a workshop or watch a video that I've created, so I don't have to spend the hour explaining to you, oh, your adrenals, your thyroid, and this. You will kind of understand.
I'm fed up with my body.
Yeah, well, you know, it's time to get healthy, you know?
It's